everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, he was born and raised in New Orleans, cooked in Italy and Germany, then came home, where he now owns 3 terrific restaurants, featuring Asian, Italian, Cajun, and Creole flavors. Here's Michael Gulotta. Chef, how are you? Thanks for doing this.
I'm well. Thank you for inviting me. Excited to be here.
So glad to have you. First, most important question. As a lifelong New Orleanian?
New Orleanian.
Okay, as a lifelong New Orleanian, when it comes to po' boys.
Oh.
Parkway or Mother's?
Oh.
Or a place I've never heard of?
I'm going to get myself in trouble on this.
No, go ahead. Come on. Go for it.
Oh man, Mother's is purely for tourists. So that's like the locals don't go to Mother's. And we still go to Parkway. Like I still go get the surf and turf from Parkway, or what really mine is a half shrimp, half oyster with a bottle of Barks root beer, the glass bottle of Barks root beer. That's like a New Orleans tradition. But you also have, there's God, my favorite used to be, it closed. It's not there anymore. Bevy had the best po' boys in my mind. Bevy seafood restaurant, but they closed, and now it's a new, even cooler spot called Porgy's, which does just like really fresh seafood. It's like a seafood market now. But I don't know. There's a lot of good po' boys in town. You know who I like now actually is Banh Mi Boys. They do a good job. It's a Vietnamese Peter Nguyen, and he does his play on because he's from New Orleans, and he does his mix up of Vietnamese and traditional po' boys, and his are really good.
What is it with you and Asian food?
So, you have to understand, if you grew up in New Orleans, I love going into like the history of things. And obviously New Orleans was a French colony, and Vietnam was a French colony. And there's a huge Catholic contingent in both sides. And so during the Vietnam War, priests were going from New Orleans there and doing missionary work and bringing the Vietnamese back. And so we have this huge Vietnamese population per capita. Obviously Houston's like way more massive, but per capita, New Orleans' Vietnamese population is the largest, or was the largest in the country. And so I grew up eating pho and banh mi and bun bowls and bánh xèo pancakes. And I just grew up eating that food, and I loved it. And I grew up with Vietnamese friends and going to their homes and singing karaoke and eating good food and drinking bad beer. And that was like a thing. And so I've always just loved that cuisine. And what I really loved about it was like, it would always be their grandmother or their aunt cooking for us while we were like drinking beer and singing karaoke. And they would make Vietnamese food with New Orleans ingredients, or they would make New Orleans food with Vietnamese ingredients. And like you get these mashups, and it took that really, hearty New Orleans soul cuisine, but it brightened it up with lemongrass and shrimp paste and ginger. And I was like, this is amazing. And so that is how, mofo came about.
Okay, so you didn't call it mo-pho.
No. And it's been mofo's 11 years old now. And so the history of it gets so convoluted. But what it was that is what we all ate on our day off. So if you worked in the food industry, the only other real ethnic cuisine, because New Orleans has this, I'm a huge believer in that your greatest strengths are also your greatest weaknesses. And New Orleans has this ability to assimilate every culture. So everything becomes New Orleans. Like that's what she does. She just we have a French Quarter, but a French person hasn't lived there in 200 years. Right. So it's like, we don't have like Little Italy and Chinatown, and we don't have those areas in New Orleans. Everything becomes New Orleans. And so when I was coming up in the restaurant industry, the only ethnic food you could find was Vietnamese. So you were stuck eating either Cajun Creole, or you would go get Vietnamese food. There was a few like, you could find like a Korean place somewhere maybe, and you could maybe find like a traditional Mexican, but usually it was like Tex-Mex, but if you wanted really good ethnic cuisine that was just different from what you were eating every day, you went and sought out Vietnamese food. But after Katrina, most of the Vietnamese places in actual New Orleans proper on the east bank of the river weren't there anymore. They all went back to New Orleans East. They all Photo Bay, they kept one, but Photo Bay had like a bunch of restaurants, and they all went back down to the original after Katrina. And so we wanted to open one like in mid-city New Orleans and do our play of like New Orleans meets Vietnam. And so Mofo came about as being just a place for restaurant industry people to eat just really flavorful our version of New Orleans mashed up with Southeast Asian Vietnamese cuisine.
Okay, let me back you up to the journey that got you to opening Mofo.
Okay.
I read that you started cooking when you were 9 because of a TV chef. Is that hyperbole? Is there any accuracy to that?
No, as a Yan Can Cook. I loved Yan Can Cook. I watched his show.
That was Chef Martin Yan, right?
Yeah, Martin Yan. Yeah, absolutely. I've always been obsessed with sort of that alchemical sort of taking, disparate parts and bringing them together and making something entirely different. And that is always, and just he would do it so quickly, and he would and he would do so many things, and I was just mesmerized by him. And so I was always making my mom like take me to the grocery to buy all the ingredients, and I would cook all of this food. And I mean, you must have thought like I was cooking like these huge meals just for my family.
Wait. At the age of 9?
She had to do all the cutting, and she would do all the cutting, and I would sit on the counter with her, and we would just work through it. I'd stand on a chair and we'd do all the stuff, and it would come out really. I was just obsessed with food for a long. I've always been obsessed with food, and also like my stepdad was a fireman, and firemen in New Orleans, like cooking is it's a thing, right? It's like a competition between all of them. So we were always cooking like big meals at home, and I just sort of fell in love with it. And I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think, like 9, 10. I don't know. I mean, how young? I do know that I think like I was still in middle school that I had to write a book report, and they had to do this like a short autobiography. I found this after Katrina when I was cleaning through my mom's house, and the first line I had to do a little autobiography on myself, and it said that my name is Michael Gulotta, and one day I want to run restaurants.
Wow.
All the way through high school, I kept cooking at home. Like my mom had to go back to school to get recertified as a teacher, so she was always in night school and stuff. So I would cook for my brother and I. Like she would literally leave recipes on the counter, and I would cook, and so I mean I just loved it. I loved the whole thing, and at that time they had they had a culinary school at Nicholls State, which is like 45 minutes outside of New Orleans, John Folse's culinary school. And so I was able just to flow right into there. It was just, and also, that was the late 90s. It was like 98, 99. And that's when chefs were really becoming these, big personalities in food or in the country.
While in culinary school, you worked for Emerald?
I worked for a lot of people. I worked at Emerald's Del Monaco when I was 18 and 19, under Dave McKelvey, who was a really awesome chef. And it's funny because Dave McKelvey's son now works for me at Tana. And I worked for John Folse at his restaurant up in Lafitte's Landing. I worked for Besh for 9 years. I was the chef de cuisine at Restaurant August for 7 years. A lot of New Orleans personalities.
And then you went to Europe?
All of that was intermingled. So I got my job at Restaurant August, I guess in 2001. And then I took the job knowing, when I took the job, I was like, hey, I really want this job. Because that was the hottest restaurant in New Orleans at the time. And I was like, I want this job, but I've already lined up this restaurant in Italy, in Liguria. And I'm like, I want to go to Liguria. And he was like, absolutely.
Now, did you work there? Did you stage there? What was the deal?
So it was this is really like a 2-part deal. My school, Nicholls State, helped me. I made this sort of like my final course. They helped me find, there was like a culinary school in Castiglione di Asti, which is up outside of Torino. And I spent like 2 months there, like learning kitchen Italian and learning basics of Italian cuisine. But they found me a restaurant to work in, and that was on the coast. In Liguria, all the way. I was in between 2 tiny towns, Sanremo and Bordighera, and so I was at this restaurant that was on the water, had its own private beach, and this was it would have been 2003, so there was like a really horrible heat wave, and I lived above the tool shed out back the restaurant, and I just worked there for months for free, and it was just amazing. I mean, it was just. We only served whatever was fresh seafood that day. We had no menu. It was just fresh seafood, pastas, like whole baked fish, pasta tossed with fresh seafood, and that was it. Like there was no meat anywhere on the menu. Every once in a while, my chef would like get on his scooter and drive over to France and buy a nice load of foie gras and do like a couple of nice dishes at night. Because at night it was all tasting menu, no menu. You sat down, and he would cook you like 8 courses, all seafood, and every once in a while he'd like hide in some foie gras or something.
And what did you take away from that? How did that influence or mold your future as a chef?
Well, that's what's the craziest part because I was always obsessed with Italian and pasta. And it's funny, man. Like I'm usually pretty brutally honest, and I was trying to get when I was at all. I have a problem where I never really can see myself from other people's perspective, and like when I was trying to get out of August, um, like I said, I'll be honest, I kind of saw the way things were going, and I'm like, I need to get out of here. I was secretly trying to find investors to open a new restaurant, and like no one was interested in doing an Italian restaurant with me at all.
Let me just back you up. When you say you saw how things were going, you got to get out of here. That ended up with, there was an ugly lawsuit battle involving the owner and staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. More like a big blow up article on how things were run in that company, which my business partners and I all worked for in that restaurant. We were like, things are getting hairy, and so we were like, we got to leave. Everyone knows the culinary world back then was very cutthroat, man. Like if your boss found out you were leaving, he might not be that supportive. And I had 2 kids and this and that, and I was making pretty decent money, and like I didn't want to get fired before I had another job lined up. And so I was like sneaking around trying to find an investor, and I really couldn't. And so my good friend, who's still my business partner, Jeff Bybee, came to me and he's like, "Hey man, like I can't get us the money to do like a big restaurant, like a big like August style, like with Italian food, but I can get us the money to go like do something small and fun, and like then we can grow into something bigger later." Because back then, like that's what chefs did. They started one restaurant and they grew because it was a different economy and things were kind of booming in New Orleans. It was post Katrina. There was a lot of money flying around, and so we were like, "Yeah, let's do that." And so I was like, "Well, we're going to do this little spot. Like, let's do something simple." And so we're like, man, they really need like a Vietnamese restaurant in Mid City, and so that's how Mofo came about. But it was so funny because I honestly didn't think, because I talked to like different investors and no one was really interested in investing in me. And also, like, I'm not a good talker. I'm not good at like, I'm very sometimes self-deprecating and not very good at like talking myself up. It's just one of my weak points that I'm aware of. And so I just wasn't getting any traction trying to open this restaurant. And it was so funny because then we're like, okay, we're just going to do this like little fuzz spot and like generate some income and then try to do something bigger later. And like when we said we were doing that, all of a sudden it was like on Eater National's most anticipated restaurants. And we're like, what the hell? So I had to like go back and make it a more chefy restaurant than it was originally intended to be. So that was sort of like some mental gymnastics on that one.
The piece of your resume we jumped over, I got you in Italy, but did you also work in Germany?
I did. I got to give credit where credit's due. That was due to John Betsch. He worked for a chef in the Black Forest of Germany, Karl Josef Fuchs. He's one of those chefs where he chose, like, he had Michelin stars and he chose to like give them all up and just cook traditional German cooking. And so like when you're at his restaurant, like, and now he's sort of retired. His daughter has taken over the kitchen because that's how it is there. Like they just hand over the restaurant's been in their family for generations. But when he was in charge entirely, like he was the restaurant that other Michelin-starred chefs came to eat when they were on vacation because he still did the traditional. Everything was very traditional in his cooking, and it was a great place. I spent almost 2 years there because he also would go hunt, and here you can do it in Germany. They would sell the meat, the food they like. He and his little hunting contingent would sell the meat to the restaurant, and like that's how they would like pay their land leases to go for their hunting leases and everything. Like, and so we would get whole deer, whole elk, whole wild hogs on the hoof. And we had a whole butcher shop in the back because it was a hotel restaurant. So it had a huge infrastructure. And so, I mean, that's where I learned to butcher and everything. Like they used to call it old school seam butchery. Like you didn't just have band saws. You did everything with a knife and maybe a bone saw, like a simple hand bone saw. And we'd butcher down whole, like skin them, butcher them down. Well, skin them, let them age in the cooler, and then butcher them down into the parts. And then these parts got braised, these parts got we used every part of it, the kidneys, the brains, everything got served.
Can you make Americans like offal?
No. But it's funny. I think now that's changing, right? So like the Vietnamese. All the Vietnamese Americans, they love tripe and offal and all that and blood cakes and but the traditional you and me American, no.
But as we think about sustainability, et cetera, this is the most wasteful thing on earth.
I mean, the biggest thing is changing the narrative, and that's the one thing you learn in Europe. I mean, they would make me save plastic wrap. Like, it's like one time they made me be the pastry chef for a little while. The pastry chef quit in the middle of my time in Germany, and they're like, "You're the pastry chef now," and I'm like, Okay. So, and one time I was cutting up fresh fruit to make sorbet, and the old man, the chef's dad, came through, and he's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "You never. The fresh fruit is for the fresh fruit tray. The fruit that is getting too old gets because it's sweeter gets ground up for the sorbet." And I'm like, "Okay, right." And like, coming up in New Orleans, like, I'm sorry, American kitchens before that, it was like everyone was so wasteful. Like you get a pepper, and you hack either end off, throw it in the trash, hack the sides off, throw them in, and like you end up using what 50% of the pepper. Yeah, like now I watch cooks, like this is my number one thing is like the pepper in the garbage can thing. Whenever a new cook comes to me and they have to cut up a pepper, I'm like, you just threw 50% of that pepper away. All you should be throwing away is the green stem and the very center core. Everything else is usable on that pepper, right? And even then, we can find uses for things like. And so I think that was in American foodways. Obviously, or as you obviously know, if we're talking to so many chefs, our foodways are so broken with how much waste we have.
Are they getting better?
No, it's like giving up gas cars. Like it's not going to happen. People just aren't going to inconvenience themselves.
Can you force them to do better?
No, I mean we do a lot of not so much at Tana. Like in Tana, at Maypop we got real creative. Like Maypop was a big zero waste restaurant where we were doing as much as we could to utilize every bit of product, and that's why. And still, like Maypop has the lowest food cost of any of my three restaurants because we still were very good. And I've always, even at it was a huge compliment. Our sommelier at Restaurant August years ago was like, she's like, you're really good at taking not luxurious items and making them taste luxurious. And I think that's what I learned in Europe. We would have a few luxurious items, but like especially in Germany, he was very good at taking like offal and making it very luxurious, right? And so, and I do that a lot at Maypop. Maypop is very big on taking very like just common items and making it delicious. And so we run an amazing food cost at Maypop. Whereas like Tana, I struggle with food costs because people want opulent things like lobster and truffles and foie gras.
The Black Forest was straight from Italy?
No, so I actually came back for about 6 months back to America and lined up the visa and everything to go. Because Germany was like full visa, full, like I was 100% legal. Italy, I was questionably legal. And they paid me in Germany. I had an apartment. I had a car. Like I had health insurance. I had health insurance when I lived in Germany.
Okay, so we're back in the States. You open Mofo.
Yes.
And the world loves you.
It was a wild time. The amount of awards that Mofo won was just crazy. Still staggering to me.
What are you serving there?
What we did so well at Mofo is that we made sure that we kept a sense of, and I've always tried to do this with all my restaurants, is they always keep a sense of place. And I think that's what a lot of chefs struggle to do is like, your restaurant may have beautiful food, but do you feel like you are in a particular place? And I think Mofo did a really good job of making sure you knew you were in New Orleans, even though you were eating like hand ground curries and roti bread. But there was all these things that kind of linked it back to New Orleans. And the biggest thing was like, I am a very sensory person. So I make sure that the food is always just hitting on all cylinders. And I think, but that's a New Orleans trait. Like when you come to New Orleans, the food, or if you grew up in New Orleans, the food has to, I call it aggressively seasoned. Our food here is always aggressively seasoned. And so, and that is why we've always sort of stayed this culinary region, because our food is so aggressively seasoned. And so I was doing the dish that I got to do in Aspen for Food and Wine was, I did our lamb neck curry. So like lamb necks back then were like bi-cuts, right? Now, like they've had like a big resurgence and they're hard to get because everyone started wanting them. But when I did it, they were a bi-cut. So I got all these lamb necks in. I would braise the lamb necks like old school French style. So like with citrus zest and anchovies and garlic, and I'd braise them all down. I'd pick the meat, but I wouldn't use that braising liquid. I would just warm the meat in a little bit of the braising liquids, but then I'd sauce it with this really awesome like mortar and pestle style hand ground green curry sauce, and I'd spoon it over the top like at the last second, and then top it with like this. We used to call it our Thai trail mix, which was like cashews and bananas and sesame seeds, and then serve it with a little piece of roti bread. And like I don't know, did I do it with that? I think I did it with rice in Aspen, and like everyone went fucking nuts. Like people were like, chefs were coming over like, this is so delicious. I'm like, it's just because I made sure it's hitting on all cylinders. Like there's fish sauce in there, it's the whole hot, sour, salty, sweet, right? So I'm making sure that it's hitting all of those bits. It's got a little bit of spice, a little bit of acidity, a little bit of sweetness, so it hits everywhere in the fish sauce. Like now, even at Tana, fish sauce is in everything because it just umami blasts your palate. And, people aren't used to that.
How the hell did you learn to cook Southeast Asian cuisines? I mean,
Uh,
you went to culinary school in Louisiana.
and trained in Italy and Germany. Yeah, I know. I just love the flavors, so I taught myself. I didn't end up traveling to Southeast Asia till my second restaurant, Maypop, was open. I just would go and eat at local Thai and Vietnamese restaurants and would just tinker with the flavors until I got it. And that is, I guess, one of my good strengths is that I'm able to. I just tinker and tinker and tinker. Like our gumbo that it's on the menu now, but it's going to come back soon at Mofo. We do a gumbo, but whenever I would go eat at Vietnamese restaurants, I would get like the fermented black bean braised lobster or the fermented black bean braised shrimp, and it always tasted like gumbo to me. And so I started making my gumbo with fermented black beans, and then I started adding ginger, and I started adding lemongrass, and then then I'd serve this gumbo to people, and they're like, "Well, it's gumbo, but it's not gumbo," But I always make sure it kept the soul of gumbo. Like I still started it with a dark roux. I still toasted my crab bodies in that roux. I still add the Trinity and caramelize it down, just like I learned from Chef Fulse. Like I did all of the things that I learned growing up in South Louisiana, but then I added the fermented black beans, and I even added cassia bark into it. And then you have something that is the same but altogether different. And now it's like I need to bring it back at Maypop. It used to be a lunch dish at Maypop, and it literally got written up in Southern Living and everything else as being this amazing gumbo. And then it's funny because a lot of the cooks don't want to make it these days. Like they want to, it's weird because, and that's what we fall into that trap of, the young culinary kids don't want to do the soulful things. They want to do whatever's hip and new, but it's like the soulful thing is just what keeps us grounded. And so I've always been very good at walking that line of keeping it soulful while trying to make it interesting and different.
You have trouble with the recent graduates from culinary school? Do they all want to be TV stars?
So here's where I start feeling, and I'm 44 years old. But here's where I start feeling old because I don't really know what people want anymore. There's a few that come through that are like old school, just want to cook. But now legitimately they can go. You can be like a freaking TikTok star, just like demoing dishes in your kitchen, and some of them can make it. But I still think it's like anything else. You have to be super diligent. And you have to have some kind of hook that people really love. And so I think a lot of people try and only a few make it.
Do you see fewer young chefs driven by the real passion to please people?
Well, I think we're back down to now the only ones that are showing up are the ones that have that passion. I think the market got flooded with a lot of people who saw famous chefs and thought, I can do that. And so I think there was that for a long time where I think we just flooded the market with people who are like, I'm going to be a chef. And then they get in the kitchen and they're like, this place is fucking hot and it sucks. And I got burned all the time. And you're like, yeah, you got to really be.
And my boss told me to go in a corner and cut up potatoes for 4 hours.
Right. I think now we're in this position where the ones who are really coming through now are the ones that actually really have a passion for it. So I think there's a silver lining to the fact that we are doing it with less cooks, but the cooks that are there care.
So you open Mofo, it's a big success.
Yeah.
And you open Maypop. What's the difference?
Man, what's the difference? This has been the whole, okay, I could never get anyone to understand Maypop unless I cooked for them.
Okay.
And so I would go do these cooking demos. The story would always be, the dish I would always do is what is truly the difference between a sauce Creole and a curry? They both use a lot of the seafood, the holy trinity of New Orleans cooking, peppers, onions, garlic, celery. But, in Southeast Asia, you would substitute a little bit of ginger in there and lemongrass. One uses cream and one uses coconut milk. So I just do a little sleight of hand where I build it like a traditional shrimp Creole with all the same flavors, but then I sub in the coconut milk and I add the lemongrass and I add the ginger. And then what I do is I might make some handmade noodles because I trained in Italy for a long time. And then I toss that with the handmade noodles. And then suddenly you have something where it's like handmade pasta tossed with shrimp and coconut milk and Creole tomatoes and lemongrass in there. There's fish sauce in there. And then I give that to someone to eat and they're like, holy shit, this is amazing. And I'm like, yes, that's what Maypop is. But if I try to explain it to you in words, it does not work.
And what do you say to people? And there are plenty of, in air quotes, foodies who love to slide into a restaurant, taste something and say, this is not authentic.
Yeah, that sucks. And we still get it. People love to come to Mofo and be like, this is not authentic. And we're like, we've never claimed to be authentic. I was always very clear in being like, I am never trying to do traditional Vietnamese food. I don't want to do traditional Vietnamese food. I love eating it. I truly love, even when I was living in Germany, the closest thing I could find to New Orleans comfort food was going and getting a red curry at a Thai restaurant, because Southeast Asian cooking is very similar to New Orleans cooking, where we cook with that hot, sour, salty, sweet attitude, where it really hits your whole palate. And so if I'm not, that was my comfort food. When it got really cold and I couldn't find gumbo, I went and got, and I couldn't find a shrimp Creole, I would go get curry. That would be my comfort food. And so we even used to have, like, my brother used to be one of our business partners in Mopo. He got out during pandemic, but he had shirts made that said on the back, like, authentically untraditional. That was the thing, was walking that line being like, we are not traditional, but our food is still soulful. And that's what we always try to make sure, but you can't win that battle with someone who who wants to come in and be like, this isn't what it's supposed to be. And you're like, okay, but if you could just maybe relax and try it, maybe you'll have a good time. We're not trying to tell you how to eat. We're just having fun cooking.
Then you opened Tana.
Everyone calls it Tana. But her name was Gaetana.
Who is she? Whose name is it?
She was my great-grandmother.
I didn't realize.
Yeah. So my great-grandmother, she was born in New Orleans, but raised in Palermo. So her family came over from Sicily, had her, and then went back. And then she was raised there. And then they came back when she was, I think when she was like 9 or 10. All of my family Sicilian recipes are from her. The fun, what I really love right now about Tana, and it's stressful, man, because we're in that, how restaurants are. You have that opening where you're literally, people can't get in the door. And every restaurant I've opened does this. You open, can't get in the door, and then you go down to like slow, right? Because you haven't become part of people's typical rotation yet. You're just not on it yet. You're not, like, people still go to their haunts, and you have to slowly become one of those haunts, and that takes a longer time than the newness. Like, the newness wears off, and so we're in that middle dip right now, and of course that it stresses everyone out. But what I love about Tana, and it's a beautiful room. We spent way too much money on it, and this is the first time where, like, I've got big backers. They're like, we're going to make the restaurant of your dreams. Like, we're going to do this thing. And I was like, yay. But it's like the old pitfall of like, God, did we go too big? Like, it's just this massive restaurant with all the bells and whistles. All the tables are giant handwood walnut. It's like, it's way over the top.
You sound nervous.
Oh, come on. I run restaurants post-COVID. But what I love about it is when I'm in that restaurant, we really did a good job. Like, my team has done a really great job of just matching that, as the kids would say, vibe. It really does hum. And when I look at that menu, I can see Liguria on it. I can see Sicily on it. I can see New Orleans in it. And like, that makes me feel good. Like, I look at it and I see dishes that are my interpretation of New Orleans food. I see dishes that are like straight representations of dishes I served at Giunchetto and Liguria. And like, I see my grandmother's Sicilian dishes. They're all on that menu. And not only are they on there, like, we've done really, really fun, exciting interpretations of them. And like, I love that menu. I'm really into it.
Tell me about it. Tell me about a couple of your favorite dishes.
So, like, all right, the calamari. And we caught hell on this calamari because, like, every tasting, every night at Giunchetto, the first course, the second course was we like just paper thin shaved calamari, and then like paper thin did like fine juliennes of or bâtonnets of zucchini, and then you toss it really lightly in flour and you fry it like a haystack, and then when it comes out, it's just lemon juice, botarga, and olive oil, and you send it out. Right?
Is this bodies only? Are there tentacles in there?
It's so you take the cross section, like the rings, and then also you just break the tentacles up where they're not like massive.
Right.
So we put it on Tana's menu, and it's gone through a few little iterations because we had to make it like at first, because people are used to like the big thick chunks of calamari that are fried to death and kind of chewy, right? That's what people are in, like a
kind of chewy. Come on, it's like biting a tire.
Then usually get a big thing of red gravy or marinara to dip it in, right? And so I was like, we are not fucking doing that. We're going to do it like we did it in Giunchetto. And now we caught hell. People were like ordering sides of red sauce. People were like, what is this? And it morphed a little bit. Originally, I tried to do it just the really traditional way, and I knew that was going to catch hell. So now we've like developed a really awesome citrus vinaigrette that we hit it right when it goes out the door, and then we top it with our own house-made peperonata that has like it's peppers cooked down with citrus zest and garlic and spices, all in olive oil. So it's like confit with a little bit of vinegar in there. So there's a little, it's just really, really good. And so all it is just, it's flash fried, big haystack of this really, really thinly fried calamari and zucchini. And then it gets the vinaigrette, and then it gets this spoonful of the peperonata over the top. and it's so good. I mean, just when you look at it, and it's like it's very simplistic, sort of in its construction, but when you eat it, it's just amazing. And it's one of those ones that I'm very, very proud of. I've got people eating octopus. We sell so much octopus, and like I love, I learned about the risotto nero in Liguria. Like I love risotto nero, with the squid ink risotto. And so we do like this slow poached octopus. Then we toss it in a little dredge that we make. We crispy fry it for a second, and then it gets. And I love, like, so there's a thing in I know a lot of cultures have this, but in New Orleans, when you make a big, or in South Louisiana, when you make a big pot of jambalaya in the cast iron pot, like when it's cooked perfectly, there's this crispy rice in the bottom. And I know other cultures have the same thing, that crispy rice along the bottom. Well, what we do is we make the risotto nero ahead of time, and then on the pickup, into a cast iron pan, we just put a spoonful of the cold risotto, and so it crisps, and there's a lot of cheese in there, and so it mimics the same thing, but it has like that squid ink and that fish sauce and that seafoody flavor, but then it has the crispy Parmesan, and it crisps the outsides of the rice, and so it has this like crunchiness to it, and so like that's on the bottom, and then we do this lemon aioli, and then the crispy rice, and then the fried and glazed octopus, and then we just take smoked bone marrow and tomato agrodolce, so like a sweet and sour tomato, and then we spoon that over the top of the octopus and send it out, and it's just like these crazy. It's like smoky. It's sweet and sour tomatoes, the smoky. And once again, we're hitting the hot, sour, salty, sweet. Right? It's got all these sensory things going on, and we sell. And when I put it on the menu, I'm like, no one's going to buy this. Like, they're just not going to buy it. Like, this is literally like gumbo and jambalaya territory. And we sell, like, it sells like crazy, and every plate comes back clean. It's become like a whole thing. We put it on like 2 months ago, and now it's one of our biggest sellers. And it's not cheap, because octopus is crazy expensive these days. Another fun dish that we're doing right now in Liguria, and also in southern France and Monaco, they have a dish called barbejoine. It is a pasta stuffed with pumpkin, but then it's fried. And so, and we used to serve it at Giunchetto for like big banquets. There would just be like stacks of these fried doughs, and you'd bite into it. It either had pumpkin or it had like braised down greens, like sweet chard. It was like one or the other was the filling, depending on the time of year. And so when pumpkin season hit, I was like, man, and it's funny how these things just pop into my head. I was like, oh, barbejoine. Like, it's pumpkin season. And I haven't made this dish in years. I think I ran it as like a one-off at August when I was a chef de cuisine years ago. And man, we just came up with a great, like, I have this, this lady, Dale, who's been with me. She was at Maypop. We moved her over, so she's been with me for 8 years now. And she rolls all the pasta. And we made the filling together, and so it's like it's like roasted down pumpkin with lots of cheese and a little bit of arborio rice folded in, and then she's making these perfect little triangular pillows, and then we fry them, and then down beneath we put stracchino cheese, which is like this really soft, salty cheese, and then some roasted delicata squash, and then the 3 big pillows, and then we top it with this like brown butter and honey vinaigrette kind of thing. I was like, who is going to buy a pumpkin stuffed fried pasta? And it sells like gangbusters, and it just blows my mind. So like, that's why I look at this menu, and I'm like, this is truly Ligurian food. And there's nobody in New Orleans or probably in the South doing Ligurian food, which I love.
Well, you just told me something I did not know. I thought fried ravioli in St. Louis was a completely American invention.
Oh, no.
They're frying filled pastas in Italy, and I did not know that.
Barbejoine's old. It's like it's funny. It's like it's the national dish of Monaco. Yeah, during the Grand Prix, like barbejoine is served everywhere.
You've filled a huge empty spot in my culinary library.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I do want to one of the New Orleans dishes that we do there that we do really well. I feel like I need to round it out. So one of the New Orleans, and I have to do one of the Sicilian ones. So the New Orleans one we do really well is my interpretation of oyster bordelaise. So oyster bordelaise is a very New Orleans Sicilian thing, and it's nothing like French bordelaise, which obviously is like Bordeaux wine and bone marrow and veal stock or demi-glace. And so this one, the New Orleans bordelaise is just aglio olio. It's oil, garlic, but we finish it with like chili flake and butter, and we usually serve it over broiled oysters or fried oysters. I always love sort of playing on the fact that Sicily is so close to North Africa, so I bring in a lot of those North African spices, and so I make a sauce where I cook down shaved garlic, fennel, but then I add a little bit of cumin, a little bit of fennel seed, a little bit of Aleppo pepper, and then add a touch of sherry, and then I emulsify it all back again with butter, and then we spoon that over fried oysters and finish it with like shaved grana padano, and citrus zest and a little lemon aioli. And it's a beautiful dish to look at. And it's the New Orleans oyster bordelaise is just, cranked up and turned on its side. And that's just the way I love to cook.
And the third category you were going to jump into?
So we did a few Ligurian dishes that are on the menu. That one is as a New Orleans reinterpretation of a New Orleans Sicilian dish. And then I do one that's like a straight Sicilian dish. I do Gulf snapper, but I top it with pesto trapanese. So Trapani, the city in Sicily, they have their own type of pesto, which is, instead of being the traditional Genoese pesto, which is the basil, the pine nuts, the cheese that everyone knows, pesto trapanese is almonds, tomatoes, and Parmesan cheese. So we make this one where we like oven dry tomatoes, and then we toast and grind up Marcona almonds, and then we add in I do Grana Padano because I also spent some time in Asti, which is the Po River Valley, which is where Grana Padano is from, and I think Grana Padano is just a better cheese. They're both good, but Grana Padano is a little saltier and a little more umami heavy. And so we have like this really flavorful pesto, and then we make like a basil aioli underneath. We had a food writer in, and he's like, man, this is like the sort of like the two battling pestos, because it's like a basil and garlic down below, and then it's the Trapani style pesto up top, and one's beneath the fish and one's on top of the fish. And what I love about it is that it's a very easy plate up on a busy night, and we sell tons of it.
Now you're taking us into the secret world of restaurants. There are dishes known as easy plate ups?
Absolutely. And that's one of those ones where it's relatively easy to prep, because the only real thing on the plate, there's only three things on the plate. It's the pesto, it's the basil aioli, and it's the fish. And it's super flavorful, and we sell tons of it. And so it's a winner, because all you have to, like, the line cook, all he has to do is make sure she has warmed up pesto trapanese and a cooked off piece of fish, and then we can just pump out tons of them.
In 2018, you co-founded Fair Kitchens.
Yes, with Kat Kinsman and a few other great people.
Why?
And it's funny because like now I feel like I'm not doing enough anymore. Like I feel like that train of better kitchens has passed me by. I came up with bosses that, threw undercooked potatoes at me, slammed plates, broke stuff, played mind games, whispered in my ear that I was the worst thing they'd ever seen. Like, I came up in that culture, right? I think I was well suited for that culture because that's what I was used to. But also later on, I realized just how awful it was once I got out of it. Having bosses that just made you feel like shit all the time. And even told you that, like, as soon as you got good at what you were doing, they were going to make it harder for you, which I got told by bosses before. Like, as soon as you get a handle on this, I'm going to up it. I'm going to make it harder. And I'm like, why do we have to make it harder? Why can't we work on ways to make it better?
Yeah, couldn't we serve something with just a little pesto and plate it easy?
Right. And it was your bosses who were, constantly putting drinks in your hand or making you drink with them all night and then getting up and yelling at you if you didn't execute service properly the next day when they would leave and go see their family. And you're like, this sucks. My restaurants, I hope, don't run that way. And I still have a lot of people tell me that. Even at Tana, my cooks have been like, man, you're not like any chef I've ever worked for. You listen, you're very respectful. And that's just the way I am personally. Like, I've always said that I like running please and thank you kitchens. Like, we say please and we say thank you. And it has to be true. It can't be like, please, thank you. Like, it can't be like that. It has to be like, hey, thank you. That plate looks really good. Thank you for that. Like, I'm very much a fan of that. And I've always been that way. And of course, I have freaked out on people. Like, there have been stressful situations where I've blown my fucking top, but I've always been very good at, and I try to tell my chef de cuisines this. I'm like, I have blown my fucking top at people. But every time I pull them aside afterward and I go, hey, man, like, you should not have been yelled at. That was not cool. I'm sorry for that.
What do you see happening to dining in America? Are we broadening our palates? Are we still living on McDonald's?
I feel like we are going to break into kind of what we have to break into, which is a few, and almost where we were before. You have a few shining jewels of really great restaurants that are really trying to do quality cuisine. Now it requires so much more effort than it did before. Because, there was a time where, like you said, you could flood your kitchen with culinary students that you weren't paying a whole lot. Since pandemic, we pay everyone 30% more. We want to take care of these people. We want them to live living wages. We want them to have living wages. So if we're going to pay everyone 30% more, we need to do it with 30% less people, because the math doesn't work any other way. Either we have to lower the food cost or we have to do it with less people. It has to be the old 30, 30, 30, 10, right? 30% COGS, 30% labor, 30% overhead, 10% profit. That's where you want to be. How do we still put out quality food with 30% less staff? I think the food culture is going to move in the direction of kiosk style small, where like there's no server. You're walking up to even if it's quality food, you're punching it or you're punching it on your phone, you're ordering it, and the kitchen's running it out for like fast casual. I think like the era of mofo is passing, where you have like a $25 guest check average, but you're getting full service, a bartender, lots of cooks in the kitchen. Like that math doesn't work anymore.
Future plans? Maybe fast casual?
That's kind of what we're trying to work on with mofo. Does that convert into a fast casual? With Tana, there maybe always be the ability to open more Tanas somewhere in another nice big city. That'd be awesome, because it is a really cool. Like, I really do love the concept. The more I look at that menu, I just fall in love with it. Future plans are sort of waiting on the economy at the moment.
Do those of you who live in New Orleans understand how culinarily blessed you are?
And I think, and that goes back to your problem of where is food going, and obviously, you're going to ask any chef, and they're going to get curmudgeonly about the whole fact of like the Instagram and TikTok era of food that looks great but is insipid. Unless I know the chef or I get personal recommendations, I don't go to a restaurant, because too many restaurants you go to, they look great on Instagram, they look great in all the pictures, and then you get the food and you're like, this is not good.
Word on the street is yours are worth going to.
When I was just a chef de cuisine and I was doing an event, and Paul Kahn was there, and I fucking love Paul Kahn. And he gives me he's like, Mike, try this. Tell me what you think. And I'm like, oh, chef, it's good. He's like, don't fucking give me that shit. He's like, tell me what's fucking wrong with it. We're not here to just fucking jerk each other off. And I'm like, all right, chef, I could use a little acid. And he's like, there, that's what I'm talking about. We don't just sit here and do that. And like years later, when I was, a food and wine best new chef and all this stuff, I was at a dinner with a bunch of younger chefs, and they're like, oh, we got to go try this restaurant. Like, I hear it's awesome. And we go there, and they're passing the food around, and they're like, man, this is so fucking good, and this and that. And the food was awful. And they're like, Mike, what do you think? And I'm like, this food is awful. And they're like, what? And I'm like, we can't do this, guys. Like, we can't sit here and just blow each other up. And that's the thing. Like, I find all these, the word dank, all these chefs are like, oh, the food's dank. And I'm like, is it? Like, let's really look at the food. And like, they're taking pictures of it. They're posting it. They're like, this food's amazing. And I'm like, this food is fucking insipid, and it's basic, and it's missing any kind of excitement. No one tasted this. There's no balance. Like, there's no soul. Why are you posting this to your friends saying this is the best? Like, why are you doing this? Like, we've got to do better. We've got to hold ourselves to a higher standard than this.
Well, honesty's tough, man.
Right.
Chef, an absolute pleasure to talk with you, and good luck fighting the good fight going forward.
At the end of the day, I really love what I do. I love cooking. I love my restaurants. I love the food we put out. I'm proud of it. And I love all my team. I have really great team members across the board.
Michael Gulotta. I'm David Page. I'll look for you next time on Culinary Characters Unlocked.